All right. I have Neil on the show to talk about my favorite topics: metabolic health, metabolic flexibility, improving the aging process. And you are not on the beach, but you look like you're on the beach, Neil.
No, it would be nice to be on the beach. So no, the virtual background is a little bit more interesting than just the boring white walls behind me.
Yeah, that's funny. So I have to apologize. In my glass house, and it's only 10 in the morning, but it's super humid here in San Diego today. And I just worked out with my client using my DFR bands to demo with her, and I have to take them out. But I'm just sweating, so I'm having a healthy, glistening moment here. So I'll let you explain you. Why are we talking today? Why do we like to talk about these subjects? What's your why?
Wow, good question. Why? But maybe I mean, the overall why really is that metabolic health is really important to every single person on the planet. I think my journey into this, having had my own health journey, kind of then through that realized just how important metabolic health is, and the realization that 90% of people on the planet are probably metabolically unhealthy,
Yeah.
and it's leading to yeah, people to have, less energy, less happiness, less enjoyment, less fulfillment, earlier onset of chronic diseases and so forth. So whatever we can do to raise awareness for metabolic health and help people kind of understand a little bit more about their bodies. So the main reason why we're talking is as part of that, myself and my brother are doing some might say, crazy challenge in September, really to raise awareness for metabolic health, metabolic therapy, and mental health by a challenge called zero-two-lomond. So it's going to be 0 calories, two brothers swimming Loch Lomond, which is a lake in Scotland, 22 miles long, 36 kilometers. And doing so really to raise awareness that you don't need to, load up with carbohydrates and sugars to fuel athletic endeavors, really to make a demonstration of metabolic flexibility. We're obviously not advocating that this should be done all the time or everybody should do this, but really to make people stop and think, how am I fueling my body? Because using the balance of all the fuel sources available is really where people tend to be in optimal health. And so, yeah, that's I think why we're talking today, and excited to have a conversation with you.
What's your background, your training that brought you into the metabolic health space besides
Yeah,
personal
good.
experience?
Good. Well, much of it, I think everybody I speak to, and I know that having listened to your podcast, that's the first thing I would say. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Having listened to a bunch of your podcasts over the last couple of weeks, hugely appreciative of all of the amazing work that you've done over many years. I'm relatively new, at least publicly, to this space, and so thank you for having me on and be able to speak to you, and the work that you and others have been advocating in the space for many years. Has just been amazing. So, but it all starts with your own personal journey. So, I would say a quick summary of my journey, and happy to dig into any areas in detail, is that the first kind of stage was my own health journey. So 10 years ago, I was 260 pounds, 118 kilograms, and the epitome of metabolic unhealth, definitely fast tracked to an early grave. And my kind of moment of pain change was at my daughter's christening, trying to, just play a bit of football with family friends. And I had, kids 3, 4, 5 years old running circles around me. And after a couple of minutes, I had to sit down because I was so out of breath. And the realization that sport was a huge part of my life growing up, and how could I be an active father to my daughter if I couldn't even kick a football around, really kind of inspired the change in me. So I made a promise to her that day that I would become, the active, fun father to be able to do whatever she wanted to do. So that started my own health journey, which admittedly was just to get fit and healthy. But as you pull on the thread, things unravel. And I ended up then getting down the slippery slope of, endurance and ultra endurance events. And through that, became super interested in fuel sources and how kind of the body's metabolism works. So I would say that was the kind of the first step, was my own health journey. In parallel, I had a lot of close family and friends developing various different types of chronic disease, from autoimmune disease to
Mm-hmm.
cancer to bipolar to depression, mental health. And so as I started to dig into that a little bit more, I was seeing some of the parallels, but it was a close family member's stage 4 cancer diagnosis last year. It got me really kind of digging into, how do you stop, how do you reverse cancer, what causes cancer, and reading the amazing work of Dr. Lustig and Dr. Seyfried, and kind of all these it made me realize that metabolic health is the root cause of a lot of this. And so that really inspired me to, prior to that, I'd spent 20 years in the tech industry, most of that at Google, helping to build the Google Maps and Earth kind of platform and products. And I kind of realized that the world of digital mapping, is in pretty good hands. And yet, as I dug into the stats and realized just how much the world needed help with awareness, understanding, and tools to help with, metabolic dysfunction, given probably 90% of the population globally are in some metabolic dysfunction, I decided to leave Google and set my new North Star vision to help 1 billion plus people to become metabolically healthy. And that's really what kind of, launched me into the health and wellness space, and led to the swim challenge, amongst other things. And really, I'm focused on awareness and education, as well as then practical tools that can really help people at scale to help people on their own health journey.
Yeah, I always love other people's stories. So I always like to start the podcast with, what is your why? What is your purpose? What's your mission? What's your passion? Because I think we all have similar experiences that bring us to this, I want to educate and help others place in our life, our purpose. And same with myself, health issues and losing my dad 2 years ago. It's just empowers you even more to make a difference. And you have this huge mission you're setting up to help people. So I just wanted to share your website, if I can share the screen if people are watching the YouTube. But I think this is a great, just important part of what is metabolic health. Why is it important? So do you want to walk us through these definitions if people are not familiar? Because I think people hear these words all the time, and I keep trying to do videos on what is oxidative stress, what is mitochondria, what is metabolic health, because I don't think we really know what it means. So tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
what you're sharing.
So I totally agree. And there's a lot of amazing information out there. But as I realized myself, I really tried to keep my website kind of very simple and then link out as people are kind of more interested, because it can be confusing. So this was my kind of attempt to really keep it simple. So really, metabolic health is how effective our bodies are converting energy from food into energy that then can be used by the body. And really, when that process isn't working well, it is the main root cause of chronic disease. And then there are obviously a bunch of different things that kind of go into metabolic health. Nutrition, really, I kind of defined 5 pillars a little bit later on, but nutrition, microbiome, exercise, toxins, hormones, sleep, stress, age, sex, genetics, as well as your own journey kind of, through time, because our bodies, we change and our environment change as well. So it can be quite complex. At the same time, I think there are a lot of basic principles, people can kind of start with. I would say the other analogy that I like to at least to use, because nutrition, I think, we'll probably get into this today, is one of the biggest kind of, components of metabolic health. And that we've evolved as hybrid cars to have these 2 predominant fuel sources of, ketones and free fatty acids, as well as obviously glucose and carbohydrate. But like a hybrid car, most people are just putting, gasoline into the tank. And when you do that, the body really loses the ability to utilize the ketone and the fat kind of pathway in the body. And so ultimately, we are at our most efficient and effective when our bodies can switch between those 2. But given the current Western diet, most people are just putting carbohydrates into the body, and therefore they're not able to utilize fat as a fuel source. And really, metabolic health, metabolic flexibility is when your mitochondria are in a very happy state of being able to flex and use both much more easily. So that's another analogy I like to use to try and at least help people maybe understand a little bit from a high level.
Yeah, and I think I just pulling up your next part of your why and helping your mission. But I, did a video, and we can do this after, but it's Lumen. I do Pinoy metabolic testing and finding people's metabolism at rest and during exercise, looking at their fuel sources and exercise testing their fuel switches. So it's really interesting to measure. And as we say, as FDN practitioners, test and not guess. But using even the Lumen device, I've been trying to get all my clients to test, because you breathe in and hold your breath and exhale. Do you have one too? reaching back.
Yes, I was just going to say, reaching down to it. Yes, I have. Yeah,
But
Lumen,
it's
Keto Mojo, CGMs. Yes, it
yeah, I
is
have
my.
Keto Mojo, I have BioSense, and I have this, and I was wearing a CGM and trying to put it together. And anyways, we can go into that. But before I get off your website, anything else on here before we close out on sharing your why and how mission? Like, how are you you're trying to impact all these
Yeah,
people by educating and giving solutions? Tell us a little bit more about how you're going about doing this.
yeah. So really, I would say there's two aspects of it. One is really just education and awareness. And so, even though as I was going on my own health journey, I thought I, knew a decent amount around a lot of this, but it turns out I really didn't. So even as somebody who thought I was pretty well educated, and then I think it just made me realize how, so many people in the world just, don't really understand this. So really education awareness is a big part of that. And so the website, as well as things like the swim challenge, which is really, designed to be a little bit provocative, but in a good way, to do things that people just don't understand how, the normal kind of approach, or me, maybe 10 years ago would have thought, how is it possible to do that given the body needs, sugar and carbohydrates as the fuel source? So that is one part of it. The other part of it is then really practical tools that have the potential to impact, billions. And so the other part outside of kind of the awareness and so forth is then products that people can easily integrate into their lives to really help with metabolic health. And so to that point, after looking at the kind of metabolic pie of what causes it and what solutions are out there, really food, nutrition, sugar, ultra processed foods, and kind of carbohydrates are, I would say, the biggest drivers that are underserved in terms of, solutions. There's lots of amazing work going out there, as you said, kind of functional medicine practitioners and so forth. But in the food environment, there's very little. So I decided to join a company called RX Sugar, who are formulating allulose-based products, which is a rare natural sugar that actually has a lot of research and clinical studies around the kind of metabolic health benefits and impact of allulose. And so I think as a tool, given most people do have sweet cravings and a sweet tooth and struggle with blood sugar control, and allulose can be a really important piece of the jigsaw to help people kind of with, on their journey. And I'm also then obviously interested in similarly kind of investing and supporting other products which really can, scale and kind of help people in the, hundreds of millions or kind of billions realm. So that's really the two aspects that I'm focused on: education and awareness, and then really supporting underserved areas by investing in, technology or products that can really have very broad practical applications.
Yeah, I think it's important before I'll close out this website, since I'm probably distracting people listening and watching it if people can't hear and read a screen at the same time. So I'm probably being annoying. But I think it's important just to point before I leave this screen of the impact of insulin resistance. And this is a pet peeve of mine, that when people go get their lab tests in the US, it's once a year, and you get you know, some labs that are covered under insurance, and they do not cover insulin. And insulin is a precursor to type 2 diabetes. And I've heard Ben Azadi had this on his recent podcast, that 10 to 14 years, you can have elevated insulin before type 2 diabetes shows up. So
Yeah.
it drives me nuts, because I can send people to Alta Labs or DHA Labs or order whatever on my Rupa Health account, and insulin's like $14. Same thing with like getting your APOB and LP little a to
I
look at those markers.
I could not agree more. So yeah, why you're fasting insulin and even kind of, insulin. I know the different labs have got their insulin scores, because it is the biggest kind of available marker that can help predict, whether you have, pre-diabetes or not. So it should be part of everyone's standard blood work. 100% agree with that.
But like the link you have here, just click on it, but just how it's related to so many things. And this has been Bickman's site, and how this is just such a good infographic from Ben Bickman's team, that how you get sick. And I think his
Yeah.
new book is How to Not Get Sick or something similar, but
Yes. Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
like, look at all this is related to. And I just have these clients, because I do functional lab testing with all clients, and correlate that with their signs and symptoms as we do nutritional therapy and help figure out a program for people to be fit and healthy from the inside out, improve the
Yep.
aging process. And the main goal for me, as we talked about, is recreating your current self so you're your best self in the future. So when you are 70, 80, 90 years old, are you going to be kicking ass? Are you going to be walking with the walker or sitting in a chair in a retirement home waiting to die? It's
Yeah.
like we have that choice. And I think this is a good infographic to sum up everything that's related. And you're talking about chronic diseases on your website and going back to all these things of metabolic health that you're helping people with. 41 million people die from chronic diseases. 88% of people metabolically unhealthy. I mean, how much of that is by choice that you can control? It's crazy.
So I wholeheartedly agree, and I think the significant majority is, within our control. So maybe the last thing, which is on the website, which for me, I think hopefully really drives home to people why certainly blood sugar control, because ultimately that is, poor blood sugar control leads to insulin resistance, which leads to these chronic diseases. And I also always look at things from an evolutionary perspective, and our 6 liters of blood that we have in our body, we can only tolerate 1 teaspoon of glucose or sugar at any one point in time, and any more of that is toxic to the body. And so we think of that, just 1 teaspoon in your blood at any one point in time, and you think about how we've evolved over 3 million years, and we used to have kind of 22 teaspoons of sugar in a whole year, and now the average American has 20 teaspoons of sugar in a single day. And so if you think about, the body is then activating all of these kind of emergency processes to deal and manage with the blood glucose that from an evolutionary perspective, we're not designed to. I think that helps at least like kind of land why it is really important. And the other analogy is that if you're not really conscious of your blood sugar management, we're all slow boiling frogs. And then, the more that gets out of control, the faster you're turning, the heat up, and you just don't realize the heat is being turned up until it's potentially too late. And so that's another analogy kind of I like to use, because hopefully it kind of makes people think and kind of, realize and just think twice before, they go and, kind of eat a huge, pizza or something kind of loaded with carbohydrates and sugar for dinner.
I'm laughing because we have this waterfall at our house, and they have these tiny little frogs that make a lot of noise all year long, except for the summer. I was thinking, well, maybe that's what happened to them. They die because the water gets too hot in the waterfall because it's hot this time of year, and they just kind of get boiled.
Could be.
So, anyways, I focus on helping athletes and of all levels. I don't think you need to be competitive, top age group or professional athlete to listen and learn from this podcast. But just if you're exercising, or you're even curious about how you can live your best life, your second half of your life, that you can be athlete of any level, that you prioritize your health optimizer. But I find after we've had this podcast 12 years now, talking about burning fat and using carbs as your backup fuel source, but also that athletes or people that exercise a lot think I'm healthy because I exercise, and they don't realize that there's more harm than good sometimes if you're doing too much exercise and you're eating the wrong foods and timing your foods incorrectly around your exercise. So maybe you're not fit and healthy from the inside out. Maybe you are metabolically unhealthy because you're creating so much oxidative stress and you're not handling it well. And I keep talking about as we age. So what have you found with focusing on this long distance swim event that you're doing, create awareness of metabolic health, how to make it a healthy thing, because endurance exercise isn't always ideal, and then how to eat the right amount for you, and what are you learning?
Yeah, really good question. So I think that's the first thing to state, and hopefully we'll make this clear on the website, which is, really this is a demonstration to make people sit up and think. So we're not advocating that this is, a healthy thing to do all of the time, or something that everybody should go ahead and do. So it really is. It is a kind of a demonstration from that perspective, because to your point, our bodies are designed to be metabolically flexible and utilize both fuel sources, and either one, I think, in extreme for too long a period of time is not healthy for the body, because the body compensates either way through your hormonal pathways or through through different kind of areas. So that's the first thing that I would say. Second thing is very aligned with your philosophy, and I've done a bunch of ultra endurance events, as well as, pretty, I would say, somewhat decent kind of high-end marathon. And those have been predominantly low carb, but, fueled for the work required. So obviously still, if you're looking to perform, at that kind of, top end, I love how you approach it, which is, kind of have that kind of, fat as the fuel source as the base, but then strategically layer in on top what you need that helps you for your own optimal performance, I would say. But obviously for this swim, the purpose is to, to not consume anything, on the swim day and do that. So we are approaching things, I would say, a little bit, stricter from kind of, I would say, the ketogenic approach, and to really get, the body adapted to kind of, run on fat. We are also, obviously, we're not chasing a time as part of doing this. So, which is the first time for me, actually, I've ever done an event when I'm not chasing a time. So it's going to be an interesting experience. Yeah. But really, I would say kind of, and I'm also, I would say, just to add some more complication to it, I'm also going through, I would say, my own kind of second version of my health journey at the moment, whilst coming into this swim, which makes it super interesting. And I've listened enough to your podcast to know, I would say you had kind of a similar, and a lot of people do suffer with hormonal imbalance. And so the quick backstory here is, at the start of this year, as I was kind of considering and navigating, leaving the tech world and leaving my job at Google to kind of come into this mission, I was tapping into this kind of energy source. I wasn't quite sure where it came from. And I was kind of riding this mental energy high that would mean that I would go to sleep. I would no problems falling asleep, but I would wake up at like 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, feeling refreshed and ready to go. And I know how important sleep is. I would do everything I could to try and go back to sleep, but I just couldn't do that. So eventually, okay, well, I may as well get up and be productive. So I would, read, research, look into metabolic health. I thought this would last for a few days and my body would realize this was not sustainable. But ultimately, this then lasted for 2.5 months. And obviously, and at the same time, I was training for the Boston Marathon. And so from that perspective, and majority of my runs, I was still running way beyond where I thought I kind of could and should perform for that training. And then my longer runs, I was really struggling fuel-wise. So then I was chasing more carbohydrates because I thought it was, more carbohydrates. And ultimately, I realized something wasn't right when I got my labs tested, and my total testosterone was down at 101 and my free testosterone was kind of down at 11. So, and obviously, so that's been a huge learning experience, for me. And so I've been, since then, totally changed my approach to naturally kind of replenish my testosterone levels, which is working. But at the same time, I'm now trying to balance getting my hormones into balance with also doing this kind of crazy swim challenge. So so for me personally, it's been I would say an interesting and challenging journey to try and understand and balance all of these things. And so, yeah, and I've just continued to learn a huge amount about, myself and my body, and also how challenging it is. I think that's the biggest thing. It's given me a huge amount of empathy for many people out there, of just how tough it is when your biology is working against what you want to do. And it's not just this, simple thing that you can turn around. It's given me a huge amount of empathy there.
Yeah, I think that's why I like to do the lab testing and genetics with clients, to really figure out how to personalize your exercise program, nutrition, sleep, stress. I call it, the holistic method. I see you have something similar on your website, that you can't be fit and healthy from the inside out if you're not prioritizing your sleep hygiene routine, the quality of sleep, not just sleeping through the night, but what kind of sleep are you getting to recover and repair. And I think I never can decide if stress management or sleep is more important, because they all, one impacts the other, but also poor sleep impacts everything I do. So I might be a nerd and not go out during the week, Sunday through Thursday. I'm lame. I like to go to bed 8 o'clock. So I need to be home at 7 to start my routine, to do the sauna. I mean, it's, you start to have your friends that are like you, that they understand, because I'm going to get up at 4:45 in the morning so I can do my morning routine and get out and work out before I work at 8. So I think figure out what is best for you with your genetic profile, with your lifestyle stressors, those external stressors, and identify those hidden sources of internal stress. We talk about as FDN practitioners with lab testing. Can really personalize how best should you train and fuel for the swim that's 22 miles and not cause huge surge of cortisol and hormone disruption.
So I totally agree, and this was one of the big realizations for me. So I always knew that it was a journey and would change over time. But as I was doing my marathon build to Boston, and trying to target a PR, I was like, okay, well, let me just take what I did 2 years ago when I ran my previous
Qualifying.
PR in qualifying for Boston. So let me just replicate that. But obviously, I'm different. My environment is
Years.
different,
Mm.
and that was honestly, it's one of the most difficult lessons that I've had to learn. Because firstly, obviously, I pulled out of Boston when I realized this, because it wouldn't be the healthy thing to obviously
Good
to
for
go
you.
and compete in Boston. So firstly, I did that. Secondly, low testosterone is, but it's such an important base hormone that affects affects so many other things within the body.
Yeah.
And I would almost say, actually recovering from that, and I really wanted to do it naturally. I didn't want to rely on medication and give that an option, but doing that naturally honestly was actually harder than my original health journey when I was much younger, just to lose weight, because because you're truly then fighting the kind of imbalance of your hormones. So
Mm.
I would say the preparation for the swim hasn't been ideal what I would like it to be, but at the same time, it's made me rethink and reinvest much more in strength training. It's made me think, and I'm being much more nuanced and tactical about how I approach, my nutrition, cycling in, some carbs every now and again, and not doing. I'm actually not doing as much fasted training as maybe I previously would
Yeah.
have done under normal circumstances, because that's going to work against me, with my hormones. And so it does make the challenge a little bit more kind of interesting. But I feel I've got the the aerobic base from doing kind of Ironmans previously, that I've got a lot of that kind of muscle memory, although most of it has been using my legs, not using my arms. So that's why I'm definitely in the gym a lot more, kind of working out the arms, but I'm definitely taking a much more nuanced tactical approach given my current health situation.
You made a lot of huge, great points. That one, you can't expect the same results by doing the same program you did in the past, that you've aged, and we don't blame the aging process. We embrace the change based on where we are in our time of life and our hormones or stressors in and out. So that's amazing. And that you push pause on the training schedule because you knew intuitively you had a lot of red flags that if you
Yeah,
did that race, you would have been worse off.
yeah,
Helicopter. And sorry, you can't hear it, but it's like really loud helicopter over my head. That you need to practice what we preach. And I think a lot of people don't know when to stop, push pause, and reset. And because we ignore those red flags, like when I got my adrenal exhaustion in 2013, it didn't happen middle March 2013. It happened
yeah,
5-10 years before that it built up.
yeah.
That I think it's so important. And that's kind of feel like my purpose, to help people avoid going through what I went through, being a preventative measure by stopping as we
Yes.
did. So that was very good of you to figure that out, and to know you can't depend on supplements. As I learned over my recovery years, you can't out supplement poor lifestyle habits. So if you're not still changing the way you're living life every day, course correct, you can't take all the testosterone and thyroid medication and adrenal medication. It's not going to work. From my own personal experience, it doesn't work until I changed everything and I moved here.
So I wholeheartedly agree with everything, and I think that's where I'm convinced that there is largely a natural cure to the majority of certainly chronic diseases in the early stages. At the same time, I do think in some cases there is Western medicine can be useful, but for me as a short-term help. But you've got to implement those longer-term lifestyle changes of the pillars of your nutrition, movement, sleep and
Yeah.
stress management, and toxins and environment. And if you don't do that, then I agree, then you're just, you're putting a plaster on, and the cut is just getting bigger and bigger and deeper and deeper. And then you keep putting more plasters on the cut. And eventually at some point, it's going to lead into something much, much more serious. So, but the other thing I would just stress, and it's something that I've learned and posted about, which I know you're a huge advocate, which is, everybody, as I know it's challenging because it's not covered by healthcare, but at least once a year, do a fully comprehensive metabolic and hormone lab panel. I think even though it costs out of pocket, it's the best investment that you can make in your own future, because you said it earlier, you can't manage what you can't measure, and nobody would ever drive a car without any instruments whatsoever to tell them, what's going on with the car. So if we don't do that, why do we treat our bodies any differently? And I've realized this, and I wish now that I had done much more regular blood testing to understand, my kind of, past and baseline. I've only started recently, but I'm now, committing at least quarterly to do my bloods, because I just think it's so, especially as I'm, coming out of a health challenge, it's so important to understand and kind of optimize to that.
I really believe that is 4 to 6 months for sure, like twice a year. We shouldn't just do labs once a year. And I think we can all afford it, the blood chemistry at least. I know the GI stool tests, it all adds up. You're spending $1,500 on labs. And blood chemistry, I know Ulta Labs, they always have a 20% coupon flash on the screen. So whatever it says, it's always 20% off. And it's, say, $300 for an advanced comprehensive panel, add in insulin, and it's affordable. And I'd rather do that than all the money you're going to spend trying to get help when you are too late, and then you have a lot of more issues.
So either that or the amount, I totally agree, or the amount that you're currently spending on supplements that you don't necessarily know whether you need these supplements or not, and or, for the cost of, a couple of dinners out to really know and understand and to optimize your health. And so I know a lot of, and I looked at this as it's expensive, but I think it just is, it's the single most important investment I think anyone can make in the future of themselves to help them understand. So, and I think there's some amazing blood tests are only going to, I would say, come down in terms of price and availability. So companies like Cyfox that do at home, blood lab testing, making it super easy. They'll send to your home. You can get like 26, comprehensive kind of metabolic and, blood markers, and you just, you post it off. They're also working on other great at-home devices as well. So there's a ton of innovation happening in the space that I think is going to make it much easier and much more cost-effective for people to be able to do this in the future as well.
So I know I want to shift, and people probably want to talk about your fueling. And we used to say, become fat adapted. If you're training for an endurance event, your primary fuel source should be burning carbohydrates. I can identify that in people's resting metabolism tests. When we do an exercise test, I can identify their zone 2, where their peak fat burning is, your bottom of zone 2, your top of your zone 2, when we test it properly, is that shift in fuel source to more carbohydrate, less fat. So we can identify that testing, or we have to guess. And how you eat, I've talked many videos on Dr. Dan Plews, and Dear IQ has the phases of kind of that cold keto, he calls it, for 2 weeks, and how to kind of prep to be more fat adapted as an athlete off season. So talk us through kind of what you've done, if you came from a high carb to low carb, and that we're not saying, I've kind of shifted, trying to change the name of this podcast. It doesn't mean zero carbs, it means nutrient density and finding nature's carbs, not eating crap. So it's no vegetables, no gluten, grains, and crappy stuff, but real food. So what kind of tells your transition to be able to do this swim event?
Yeah, good question. So actually, I've always been, I would say, low carb pretty much from the start of my athletic endeavors. And so the fun story behind that was actually me falling into the trap that I'm trying to educate, my brother and I are trying to educate and make others awareness. So as I was going on my own health journey 10 years ago, I started running, and then I bought a bike, and so I started cycling, and I'd already done a lot of swimming when I was younger. So then I was like, oh, why don't I sign up for a triathlon? So I just signed up for a sprint triathlon, super small. But then even for this sprint triathlon, I'm like, well, how do I fuel for this? Because you just see, athletes doing athletic endeavors that are, sports drinks, gels. So I go to the local bike shop, and I just asked the gentleman there to say, hey, look, I'm about to do this triathlon. I just want to get some advice on, fuel. And he said, well, go and speak to the gentleman over there who was sat in the cafe. He's one of the coaches here. He's done Ironmans. He's been to Kona. He'll give you some advice. And this has ended up being a gentleman called Luke Matthews, who ended up being my coach and still is my coach for many years. And at the time, he was Ironman, but he was, keto at the same time. So he was largely an advocate of utilizing fat as a fuel source. And he kind of laughed at me and said, look, you're doing a sprint triathlon. You don't need any fuel to get you through a sprint. This is how naive I was at the time. You don't need any fuel to go through a sprint triathlon. So, but my approach is actually the body can utilize fat as a fuel source. You don't necessarily need carbohydrates. So that kind of got me interested. And then as I did my first triathlon, loved that, and got down the slippery slope of ended up doing full Ironmans. A lot of that, I started off with being very strict keto for the first, I think, 2 half Ironmans. And then after that, then I started to bring in more carbohydrates and really fuel for the work required. So, bring in more as I was doing, the higher end zone 3, zone 4 kind of works, but do fasted and high natural fat kind of nutrition around, the other sessions. And so I would say I've largely always had that as my base, but I have experimented with much higher carb diets. I've actually tried every single, I would say, and I don't believe in any particular diet. I think the macros are the most important. You can plug into that whatever, dietary preference that you want, as long as you're testing, because I think any extreme diet, you are at greater risk of having some, nutrient deficiencies or something not kind of working quite well in the body. So I've kind of gone from really keto to then fueling for the work required. And I have had a few times where I have been overly, relying on carbs, and I've really felt that in my body, and I've dialed it back. And so really for this swim specifically, because of the nature of it, I would say, more strict keto and using less carbs than maybe I normally would, because much more of the training is just zone 2 training. But I'm still doing, gym, CrossFit strength, VO2 a couple of times a week to get that kind of high end work, and layering some intervals. And for those intervals, generally, I'm not using carbohydrate to fuel those intervals, but I'll strategically add some carbohydrates afterwards, just small amounts, to help the body back to the kind of the hormonal balance within the body, to not have to rely on, cortisol, all these other things which have kind of other impacts as well. So I would say the overall kind of approach. And I'm doing, I would say, the fasting swims versus non-fasting swims, given recovery from my low testosterone levels. I'm doing a lot less fasted swims than I normally do, or I'm just fasting until I feel my body say, no, I need some fuel. But then the fuel that I'm taking, if it's a long swim, is really, strict kinetic macros of pretty much majority healthy fat with some protein and very little carbohydrate, especially throughout those long zone 2 swims, to make sure the body is really efficient at utilizing fat as fuel. And as I get closer to the event, then I'll kind of extend out and do more fasting as the body feels comfortable. But I'm really trying to go, I felt I've built up a lot more intuition in my body over the last, kind of 2, 3, 4 years. So I'm really trying to go on feel, as well as getting blood markers tested and doing some testing to kind of understand where I'm at. But that's, I would say, roughly. But I would also say, given my current kind of, health journey where I'm at, I am being very specific and nuanced around this as well.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, it's what preparing for nutritionally to get your body more metabolically flexible, as fat is your main fuel source. You're able to switch from carb fuel. And that's why I think the lumen's really fascinating to learn from, and Keto Mojo, and putting that all together. How do you use those tools to figure out how to be better at your fat metabolism and be able to switch to carb fuel when you're doing a higher intensity exercise workout?
Yeah, good question. I think I haven't, I would say, used them too much specifically. I would say, in terms of measuring too much, it's more just to give me an understanding of what my baseline glucose and ketone levels are. But I also think people can get too hung up around, especially Keto Mojo, right? Because it kind of measures the availability of ketones in the blood, not necessarily, what you're using. Then my main approach is to get my muscles truly adapted to kind of, utilizing fat as a fuel source rather than kind of carbohydrates. So this, but I would love to do, I would say, more specific testing around this, but then it starts to get, more expensive. So I think for me, it's much more using them as a guideline to understand where my baseline is, and see if anything I'm doing significantly deviates from that. If it does, and I get readings really outside, it makes me, okay, well, what's going on here and what my systems is triggering that, and really balancing that with again, kind of how am I feeling as part of this? And if I'm feeling that my recovery is, slower than normal, then maybe I'll add in a little bit, more carbohydrates, to help do that on any given day or any given week. And so far, I think, going by feel has really, I would say, worked for me. And so I'm not dogmatic. I'm not tied to anything specific on any specific day. And so I know it's not a very specific answer, but I'm also trying to find the balance of doing this in a way that other people can relate to, because I would love to be able to. So I actually had the pleasure of meeting Brian Johnson, the most tested man in history, back on Monday when I was in LA. And so I would love to have that ability to be able to do all these tests and really see day to day, kind of what's making difference. But it's hugely expensive to do that. And I think for the normal person, it's how can you get a baseline, which I think actually starting off with more of an elimination diet, or just, going strict. I think keto helps give you that baseline, or however you choose to do that. And then how do you then build on top of that to be more in tune with your body and feel what works for you and what doesn't? And the more you can test around that, the better. But even outside of that, once you have a kind of a cleaner baseline, getting more in touch with the body. And if you listen to your body, I do think that you can be much more intuitive in your choices. But that is also kind of, a journey over time as well.
A couple things that I'll mention: Lumen, how I trying to use it. Also, the word keto, I've said for years, and kind of always feel like I need to redefine it for people, that when we say keto, and I think you're saying this as well, we're talking about eat real nutrient-dense food that balances blood sugar, more ancestral health, not what the food industry made keto to be, and what a lot of people think dirty keto is eating a bunch of crap that says keto on it because it has lower carbs, but it's all a bunch of processed food.
Yes.
How do you define keto?
So really great question. So I think you actually did a perfect job of demonstrating kind of what keto is. And for me, it's more of a framework, and to focus on the macros of how much healthy fat, how much protein, and how much carbohydrates are you getting, making sure these are coming from, a whole food source as much as possible. And then, what then works for you, and also depending upon your goal. And so I think understanding what you're trying to aim for is really important. And I'll give you two personal examples of this where I've had to make compromises. So coming into the swim with my hormone rebalance, I was very purposely on a much higher protein kind of animal-based diet, and taking in, and much higher carbohydrates actually, which was helping my testosterone levels. But it actually got to the point where it was that, combined with my low testosterone, was actually causing me a lot of anxiety and I wouldn't say, but borderline depression. Like I was, even though I'm in the most kind of amazing now community and environment, and I'm very purpose driven, this biology was really fighting against me. But I did that specifically to optimize for increasing my testosterone levels. And this is actually one of the things that made me realize just how powerful, being in kind of nutritional or therapeutic ketosis can be. That I then, to help, I was like, well, maybe if I take some exogenous ketones, then that would help balance me a little bit. And so I had some exogenous ketones that I was testing around with back when I was doing kind of high-end marathons, higher carb, higher ketones. And so I took one of the Delta G products that I used, and within 30 minutes, the fog lifted over my kind of, my brain fog. And it gave me a really powerful realization of, kind of what is my goal around this. And it was to optimize, testosterone levels, but that was also coming at the downside of, I would say, of kind of my mental health. So I then started to slowly shift a little bit more into more of a, stricter ketogenic approach, really to help with my mental health. And then now I've got that back in good order. I'm now back to adding, more strategic carbs around workouts to make sure I'm not putting any excessive load on my body. So you did a much better job, I would say, encapsulating kind of, and I agree, which is why I use kind of the ketogenic nutritional approach, because for me, it's not a diet. It is just what do you want out of it what are your macros, and putting whole foods into that based on what works for you and what you're looking to achieve, be that mental health, be that physical, athletic performance endeavor. And again, we're all individual. So what works for one person, it's really figuring out
Exactly.
then what works for you, and trying and experimenting, trial and error, to figure out what's most optimal for you.
So true. And oh my gosh, so much on my mind. But where am I? So many thoughts. So I think it is looking at you as a unique individual. And as you said, it's working on what foods work best for you. And I think it's very confusing out there. And I try to share that on the podcast, that I'll listen to all these carnivore people because it's trendy but not trendy, but just people are kind of shifted, over the years. I would say from paleo, and then everyone went to low
Yeah.
carb to keto to really low, 20, 50 grams of carbs a day keto. Then I got to be crappy keto. And now everyone's shifted to more animal based, to more ketovore, to carnivore. And I listen to these amazing success stories. I know Ben Azadi just posted this week. He's finished his 90-day study, did $3,500 of lab tests before and after, and had amazing results. But I always wonder, yes, that makes sense. But what if we're endurance athletes? I lifted weights this morning. I went for an hour hill repeat ride, and I'm going to go for a run, and then I'll walk and do sauna tonight. Like, what happens if we're exercising? I'm not going to eat a steak 3 times a day. I mean, it's hard for me to wrap my head around just doing animal based, even though everyone's like, oh, yeah, it's amazing. I get it, meat based, and I am. And I prioritize protein, but I think it's that shift. Like, how do we apply that to an endurance world, people that are active? And then I listened to Dr. Stacy Sims, who just had a huge podcast. I'm going to do a video on with Huberman, and really shared how men and women are different. And we women athletes may need to adjust our fueling and add in a little carbs. And she's even said 15 grams of protein pre-workout versus fasted, so we can help burn some fat, because we need to
Yeah.
burn carbs before we shift to fat burning. So it's so individual, as you said. Men and women are different. And then women are even more different with each other, because it depends on what era of our hormones, very
Yeah.
pre, post menopausal years, that I think it's so individual. So it's great to use you as an example.
Yeah. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think the other important to lens to look at this is how metabolically, healthy or unhealthy are you at the start. And this is where, so one of the things we're raising awareness for with the swim is for, ketogenic therapy. And if you are far down the chronic disease route, kind of view, then your mission is really to reverse that back. Then I do, believe, really, I would say more traditional, strict kind of ketogenic therapy can be hugely advantageous there in preventing and kind of reversing disease. So that's one end of it. But to your point, as you start to get into the realms of being metabolically healthy and flexible, that's where it is very personal and, an individual, and you've got to figure out whatever works, for you. And so I firmly believe with you that fueling for the work required, and this is where, our bodies were designed to utilize those two fuel sources. And I believe that any extreme is not good for long periods of time. It can be, useful tools, but once you get back into that kind of balance, our bodies are designed to be flexible, and it's useful to, stress them both ways a little bit. So I think that's a really important lens to look at it from an athlete perspective. I really agree, but I think it's also really, what goal are you trying to achieve? Like, even for me, my mental health was more important than I would say, than my physical health back a couple of months ago. So I really dialed down the training I was doing, I would say, kind of relatively little to help balance my hormones. I was doing much more strength work and so forth, but I was really focused. Actually, mental health is the most important thing for me right now. And once I got out of that, then now I'm shifting and changing my approach to support, the athletic endeavors of, training for the swim challenge. So, and I also think it's good to keep the body on its toes a little bit once you are in that realm of, kind of metabolic health, because we would design that way, but you've got to understand where on the scale you're starting from.
Yeah. And with your swim, I know I swim in Solana Beach here, Masters, and there's a big community here in La Jolla of outdoor swimmers. And they do a lot of the distance swimming and swim around Catalina Island. One of our swim coaches I know I didn't know, any of these people because I just moved here 4 years ago, but she's one of the record holders for channel swimmers. And she used to swim with Peter Attia, 'cause he used to live here and do these ultra distance swimming events. And we were talking about ketones, taking, a shot of ketones. I was talking to you via your last video with our FDN, Evan, and taking essential amino acids, taking electrolytes. What do you do pre-fuel during a long swim? Because you can't just sit on the pool ledge and hang out for half an hour and then swim again. So kind of talk us about how you're going to fuel fasted to train your body to burn fat, but not have that mental fatigue as you're going.
Yeah, good question. So I think it's a mixture of things. I would say a lot of the research does point to, again, too much fasting and training fasting, not being good. Does the body then start to utilize, muscle as well as fat as a fuel source? And I think that's an area of research I would love to dig in. I would love to do more testing around this. But let's just say, as an insurance policy, I do, use perfect aminos, not before every fasted swim, but before some, because again, just to have that kind of balance between the two. So that is something that we'll do purely just as a protective measure, especially given I am in a little bit of a, kind of a sensitive, I would say body hormonal kind of balance at the moment. So that's something that I will do. I'll usually.
Is that capsules or the liquid? Sorry to interrupt.
Just the capsules, yeah.
Tablets, yeah.
The tablets, yeah. So I have some perfect amino tablets. I usually start most of my swims off fasted, and then I just listen to my body. And as I start to feel, I usually actually wait for like the third hunger pang. So the first one, I'm like, okay, carry on a little bit, and then the second one, usually the third one, then I'll stop and I'll have some, fat-based fuel source. So macadamia nuts I find are a great training partner. I have been using keto bricks because I just think, again, back to, well, kind of, especially when traveling, because, finding access to real food, you need some kind of practical things, but I love the fact that they are kind of naturally formulated, minimal, ingredients and so forth. And so, but I'll only have, small amounts of that, largely to, again, really help the body still, break down my own kind of fuel source instead of taking fats. And so, I would say maybe 2.5 hours into a long swim, then I will start to take it. Then I'll just stop whenever I feel like it, take on more and more. Even some swims and sessions, I will have some fuel before. I would say I start those swims, back to just not wanting to put too much, stress on my body and, my adrenals and so forth. So that's, I would say, roughly how I'm managing it. And obviously electrolytes with water. But outside of that, I'm trying to keep it pretty basic and natural for, for a lot of my training. Sometimes if I really feel I need kind of some help, then some exogenous ketones. So I do love, they're linked on the site actually. So Juvenescence have a really great kind of ketone diester powder that I find also cognitively, again, that was one of the kind of the tools that was helping me a couple of months ago as I was on a higher protein, higher carbohydrate diet. I found that adding, some exogenous ketones in could help, help me mentally and help kind of bring that balance. And so, if I need to do a session with a little bit of help, that is useful as well. But at the same time, I'm also listening to my body a lot more. And so if, I was telling you just before we started recording, the swim I had in LA in the lake, where I was planning to go for a super long swim, and I ended up being picked up by the police because I was swimming outside of the roped area, which apparently wasn't allowed. So I was planning to do a 4 or 5 hour swim. I only got, kind of 1 hour swim in, and then had to, revisit. So I'm also not being too dogmatic as I maybe used to be around my training, in that I've got this session, I need to do X, X, Y, Z, and really listening to my body a little bit more. But I'm not doing as much fasted training as people would think, that I would be doing, because I do realize that has its pros and cons, and it can have some detrimental effect if you do too much of it. But I will increase and do more fasted and extended training as we get into kind of August and towards September. As my hormone balance kind of returns back to normal, then my body should be in a much better position to be able to handle that. Because to go 12 plus hours without eating anything, you do need to do a little bit or a decent amount, I think, of preparation to make sure just the body is comfortable in doing that.
It's too bad you can't do the metabolic test swimming because you can't really hook people up in the pool and find out what their zones are, right?
Yeah,
That'd be
so
cool.
no, so you really can't. So I think that's the other important thing about the swim is look, we're not chasing a time, we're not kind of going out there.
Yeah.
So we will be
Pace
swimming
yourself.
in zone 2. Obviously, the temperature of the water could be a really interesting factor. So it's
Oh,
been a really cold. My brother just messaged me this morning because on a previous podcast, somebody asked me what the water temperature, and it should be around 16 degrees, but he said it's going to be more like 12 degrees, which is what I think that's about.
double and add 30 is what we always did.
A double and add 30, so 12, yeah, 20, 34, yeah, like, yeah, low 50s.
Oh,
So that, and we are going to be wearing wetsuits.
you're
Sailfish are
not?
very kindly, we know we are going to be wearing
Oh,
wetsuits,
okay.
yes. So yeah,
Hopefully.
Sailfish are
Oh,
very kindly sending us some kind of later the line wetsuits because we both used Sailfish wetsuits for many years as part of this. Because again, it's just back to the purpose is to demonstrate. Maybe next year if we do it with wetsuits, then we decide that doing it without wetsuits would be an interesting. But back to your point, I think I'm also looking at partnerships with some of the continuous CGM companies. I know Abbott are also working on a continuous
mhm,
ketone monitor. So I would love to
mhm.
have, the jewel of both of those things to be able to track through the swim to see how kind of
Yeah.
metabolically, what the body's doing. So as much as we can learn through the swim, I would love for it to be a little bit more of a scientific endeavor as well. But back to your point, I think it would be great to have more testing as part of that. But really, the purpose of the swim is to keep in zone 2 and to really, do it to just prove the resilience and the flexibility of the body as a showcase to make people think, but not necessarily something that we are advocating, everyone to do. Because to the point, is it healthy doing this? It's probably not the healthiest thing to do, which is why it really is to raise awareness. It's not to say that everybody should be, working and training like this, because obviously that's not the case.
Yeah. Because I was doing low carb, probably low energy availability, low calories when I was racing Ironmans. And then when I got my adrenal exhaustion, quote, because I don't, that's what I'm just calling it. But I was doing a lot of Ironmans and marathon cycling and doing really well. I was doing my best, being fat adapted and training, be able to train at high heart rates and spare glycogen. But after a year or two of that, that's kind of, I think part of what happened is I was not eating enough and it was just a lot of stress in my hormones and everything. But I did well with minimal calories, but I think just accumulation of too much of everything does impact the hormones.
Yes, no, fully agreed. I think there's a lot of interesting, obviously research happening right now into a lot of this. I know I've listened to a couple of podcasts by Tim Noakes recently,
Mhm.
and he's now kind of a little bit back on the if you truly adapt the muscles, your muscles to be fat adapted, then you can, kind of oxidize fat up to kind of two grams,
Yeah.
which should be enough to fuel anything at any kind of zone. But I also look at that and I think, well, that's true, but it's back to your point. But what is the body then compensating? Is it designed to do that? And what is
Mhm.
the body compensating, after that? And this is where a lot of it is individual. Maybe some people might do kind of really well on that, and that's where really understanding the kind of the systems level biology. And I always try to look at this from an evolutionary perspective. And, we never in history kind of put our bodies through true full on Ironmans. Maybe we used to do, long distance runs to hunt down animals and so forth. But outside of that, we never really, I think, probably stressed our bodies in the way we do now. And
Mhm.
so a lot of that triggers off survival mechanisms within the body that are, hugely powerful, but they're meant to be used sparingly. And if you're triggering those every day, then that's also going to lead to kind of other things. So I think
Mhm.
that's where just understanding your goal, and I think there's a lot more
Mhm.
science and research to be done around this.
Mhm.
But currently, I love as you put it, kind of where's that Goldilocks sweet spot zone where you're optimizing based on what works for you and continuing your journey over time to, as you say, to get better and healthier with age.
Yeah, I think it is a good point in that more is not better. I call it, metabolic chaos is what we call in FDN practitioners when we have that beaker of stress that your hypothalamus interprets all that stress, but it's accumulates from all the external stressors and comes from the internal stressors. So we don't pick and choose. It just all comes into one funnel, and that funnel beaker overfills, and then we have imbalances and dysfunction, and we get on that HPA progression of high cortisol levels to really low cortisol levels. And that's kind of what we want to pay attention to, because that leads to all that catabolic versus anabolic. And we get in this whole disruption phase, as you probably
Yes.
experienced some of that yourself. But the
Yes,
last bit, just
indeed.
to wrap up, so I wanted to go over the lumen, what I've been trying to do with exercise. So going back to what you're saying, pre-workout, have you done this? You're supposed to do it the protocol, because I just did their training program, is morning and evening for athletes. I think it's helpful just get 30 minutes before you exercise. And then so it's like, I think it was 2 hours after you work out. So have you tried that at all? See where if you need to fuel or not? If you're burning a 1 is a 5, if people don't know, I mean, 1, I said that wrong. 1 to 5 is their scale. 1 is fat burn. So if I did your metabolic test, RER score is 0.70, that reflects to 1 on a lumen. If your RER score on a metabolic test is a 5 or 1.0, you're 5 on the lumen. So 1 to 5 on here is fat to fully using carbohydrates. 3 on a lumen would be 50-50. So it helps you figure out, okay, is my workout fat burning workout, zone 1, 2, or am I doing intervals where I'm going to deplete glycogen stores? So maybe I need to fuel differently beforehand versus fasted, or whatever adjusts. So I just thought I'd be curious if what your experience is with that with your workouts.
Yeah, no, cool. So I haven't gone to that level of detail actually. I have done a few, certainly post workout. I remember reading some of the articles, yeah, that recommended, yeah, to wait kind of 2 hours post workout.
Yeah.
But my challenge with that, because a lot of my workouts are fasted or, low calorie but with fat foods, then I'm usually, pretty hungry afterwards. So then, but no, so I would love to learn a little bit more. Maybe we
Yeah,
can,
'cause it has those different measurements, like on you go when
yes,
to measure. So people can
yes.
use that. And then your morning check-in before exercise, 30 minutes before you work out. After exercise, wait 30 minutes before you test to see a shift. After fasting, to optimize your length of fast, because you want fasting to be a 1, but if you start to see 3, 4, 5 on the lumen after fasting, you should stop your fast, because that means you raise cortisol and your fast should be over. And then before sleeping, see how your day affected you if you did too much of something, and then just checking in. But the morning check-in is for sure what people do. But I think for people exercising, when we talk about fasted exercise, zone 1, 2 versus high
Yeah.
intensity exercise, and how to match your fueling with your training, is pretty fascinating to kind of experiment to find out what works for you. And then I'm trying to learn on myself too. It's like, okay, why is it a 3? I didn't eat, what else is going on that would cause me to be a 3 when I wake up versus I should be a 1. But so it kind of gives me clues to, okay, did I have stress? Did I, not eat enough because I stopped eating early. So it really helps the bio individual part of it.
Yes. Well, you just inspired me to actually. So I bought my lumen back a few months ago, and I was more interested to I would say do tests with some of the other devices to see kind of how accurate it was. But I kind of determined to
They
that I think
don't
the
relate to
accuracy.
each other though. You
So
can't,
they don't relate,
I tried.
I would say they don't relate, but I'd say at least there was enough pattern and correlation. And I actually then spoke to the guys at Lumen and dug into the science and research. So I do think that lumens are actually pretty accurate, very accurate for what they do. But you've inspired me to dig in deep a little bit more. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to use my lumen a lot more and
Well,
track
tell me.
before, after, within, and then
Well, you can
let's.
sign up, add me as a practitioner, because then I can see your results.
Oh, okay. Oh, cool.
I have a
Excellent.
practitioner board, so people sign up with my coach Debbie Potts. I'll put you under my account so I can see and I can track. But I was using a CGM and doing Keto Mojo and the BioSense and Lumen. And I was asking Lumen, I'm like, wait, my blood sugar is level. My BioSense say I'm burning ketones at a 6, but this shows me I'm burning carbs. I don't get it. So I was trying to understand it all. So anyways, good experiment.
Yes, no, good experiment. I think much of that is back to, yeah, kind of obviously the blood really is kind of what you have within the blood, but it doesn't necessarily, give any clues as to what's going on in the muscle. And similarly with women. So I admit I need to do a lot more research, I would say, in this area around all of them, because to your point, I think understanding that in a lot more detail, but they all kind of measure slightly different things, which makes it difficult.
Yeah. So good. Well, let's wrap up. Tell everyone where to find more about your event, your website. We'll put everything in the show notes, but just verbally tell them and how to support you and your challenge and where to learn more.
Yeah, that would be great. So for the challenge, the main site is zero-two-lomond, so 0-2-lomond.com. So there you can find more about what we're doing, why. We're also raising donations for great causes around ketogenic therapy, mental health, and kind of chronic disease support. So we're also trying to raise as much money as we can for these great causes. So that's the website. I also have then my kind of 1 billion plus metabolically healthy. That's 1bmh.org. And if people want to connect with me, LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me. So if you search for Neil Gyte on LinkedIn, then yeah, they're probably the best three places to understand, learn a bit more, and get in touch with me.
You're Neil. My husband's Neal, and everyone always spells it Neil. So it's spelled the normal way.
It's spelled the normal way, yes. Neil, yes. I'll make sure, yeah, we'll add it to the show notes to make it a little bit easier. But there's not too many, and surname Gyte, Gyte. So I think there's only one other Neil Gyte in the whole world. So I am relatively easy to find with the right spelling.
That's good. Well, good luck. Let us know how it goes. We can do follow up when you get done and see how it all went. It'd be kind of fun to do video post race.
Yes, no, we'd love to do a video post race, post challenge, and let you know how it goes. So thanks again for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation, Debbie.
Yeah, and if you're over in North San Diego, we can test you out on the metabolism testing and put you in the pool.
Yeah, perfect. Would love that.
All right. Thank you. Good luck.